Our topic today is called Under the Shadow, How Russian Aggression is Changing the Region. So let me introduce our panelists. Botakoz Kassymbekova, University of Basel, Nino Robakidze, IREX, Georgia, Alina Rudina, Media IQ, Belarus, and Alexandra Volneanschi, Media and Human Rights, Moldova. I think that many
I don't, 85 million of people. So we don't have that. We don't have that. We don't have the labor camps on the scale and the deportations on the scale and the kind of the genocidal violence inside Russia on the scale that we had with Stalinism. So I think this is the first thing. But on the level of ideology, when Hannah Arendt was comparing Nazi Germany with Stalinism, one of the things that she says was kind of the same, is the ideology that puts some kind of laws of nature over kind of reason. So, for example, she's speaking about the phenomenon, it's called Verlassenheit, abandonment, the feeling of abandonment. So, for example, when Jewish people were proclaimed as, you know, inferior people and who had to die, if they would say, I cannot die, why do you do that? We are citizens, and if they would try to explain with reason that they, you know, have the right to exist, the kind of the Nazi ideology would say, but this is the law of nature, there is this kind of Aryan order, and you have to die, and it's not our decision, it's something that comes from nature. And that's kind of one of the main functions of fascism, is that you develop an ideology by which you say that there is kind of a a mantra, and you are not responsible, and we just have to follow these bigger laws of nature. But with Stalinism, this was class struggle. So the proletariat and the bourgeoisie, the proletariat just have to win, and so this is why we can kill the aristocrats, we can kill the bourgeoisie, and we don't have to feel bad about it because it's the laws of idea is that, for example, Ukrainians are Russians, and there is nothing you can do about it, and you cannot enter a dialogue. So an idea and feeling and anger drives over reason, and you are ready to kill people and think that you are doing something good and something right. So, but even the aesthetics, the Z symbol, the disciplining of children according to this ideology, the prioritization of the state over the individual. We have the war, of course, the idea that violence will cleanse and repair the constructed world that they aim at. And of course, very important is the idea that the right degenerates. So the kind of the West is degenerate. It's a very homophobic, patriarchal, leader-oriented ideology. So I think it's more or less a consensus that Russia is fascist today. Yes, this is the first.
What about your own country?
My own country. I'll just start with an episode that I experienced in my family as being young, when Solzhenitsyn said that northern Kazakhstan should be part of Russia. I come from, of course, culturally erased family. Kazakhs during the Soviet times were a minority because there was this hunger during collectivization. So Kazakhs became a minority in Kazakhstan, and of course there was a very forceful process of Russification, and my family spoke Russian, and I grew up as a Russian speaker. But when Solzhenitsyn said that northern Kazakhstan should be part of Russia, on that day, he wrote this article and my grandmother read, on that day she stopped speaking Russian to me. So kind of that feeling that the northern Kazakhstan will be annexed by Russia. In Kazakhstan, it is a very present topic since 1991. This is the reason why the capital was moved to the north, because the idea was Russia will not attack the capital city, but now we know this is not true, but kind of the border was always, is part of our kind of national identity as well. In 2014, already, big parts of the Kazakh society were furious about the annexation of Crimea. So, because we identified ourselves with Ukraine and with the problems. So, what Kazakhs, big parts of Kazakh society, and that's this is discussed every day on different platforms. Kind of identify themselves with Ukrainians because we had this hunger, collectivization hunger, which is called in Kazakh asharshaluk, during which around 40% of the Kazakh population died. So we kind of compare our debates of the hunger to debates in Ukraine. Then we have the same border. We also have a huge, it's the second largest land border on earth with Russia. And we have this constant threat, and also constant threat on Russian TV, where Kazakhstan is denied its statehood. where again it says that Kazakhstan is the, gift of Russia, and that northern Kazakhstan should belong to Russia. So, and also what unites, I think, is the language question, the kind of very, very widespread Russification that took place during the Soviet times. So this year, in 1991, my grandmother started speaking Kazakh to me, but in 2022, I started speaking Kazakh myself. So this kind of desire to really put a linguistic, cultural, political border to Russia, because and I think it's a widespread societal outcry in Kazakhstan, and we do feel very, very much the danger from Russia. Yes, so this is very, very clear in Kazakhstan.
Thank you so much. And before we move to another panelist, I would like to encourage our audience to come up with questions, because then later in 30 minutes, we will have a Q&A session. Nino, my next question is for you. Georgia has now taken a heavy blow. Russians fleeing mobilization poured into your country in masses, huge masses. And what are the current moods, current sentiments among Georgian civil society? What's the current discourse on Russia and on the war?
Thank you for your question. Thank you for being here. This is really great honor for me to be here today with you. So yes, you mentioned correctly the start of full-scale invasion in Ukraine was also a new chapter in Russian-Georgian hybrid war as well. So these masses which migrated to Georgia just unexpectedly changed not just the mood in a society, but changed the whole picture in our country. It is economic, it's cultural, it's all aspects of ordinary living. And this came in a moment when Georgians were sympathizing towards Ukraine, and they were demanding from the government to stand up for Ukraine and be more vocal about its support towards Ukrainian, Ukrainian case and Ukraine in general. And unfortunately, we were not seeing that being done by Georgian government, which is pretty much oligarchic power right now. And we knew how difficult for them it will be to be enthusiastic about supporting Ukraine. And actually, that was a kind of momentum when Georgian society started these mass protests a year ago. First, it started in support of Ukraine, demanding from the government to be more vocal. Then it went to the mass protest demanding from Georgian government to demand the EU membership status together with Ukraine and Moldova. And we actually kind of achieved both at some point, but we saw that Georgian government still was not enthusiastic about it. And since then, I think Georgian society is trying to prove how united it is against Russian politics in the region, not just in Georgia, but in the region in regards of Ukraine as well. And today is Georgia's Independence Day. And we celebrate this day, and this is a huge celebration for each Georgian. On this day, century ago, we declared our independence, and that was actually the fundament and the basis of a current Georgian independent republic. And that was a moment when international society also recognized Georgia as an independent democratic state in the world, and the current international relations are recognizing Georgia in those borders, and that is a very important part of it. But this democracy was very short-lived because of Russian invasion and annexation of Red Army of Georgia after 3 years of independence declaration. And after that, all the time, Georgia was fighting to regain independence and to maintain this independence from Russia. 1991 was mentioned by already on this panel. We once again declared the independence, and like I just saw the motto on the backs of this event, that freedom is not granted and it's not something that you can have guaranteed. So we were in this process all the time, but the full-scale invasion and this huge influx of Russians also had a major shift in terms of narratives, anti-Western narratives and anti-liberal democracy narratives in general. So what happened was that before that, these narratives were coming from Kremlin propaganda networks and mostly were disseminated by the far right groups, which were not really having a huge part in mainstream political debate and somehow were marginalized because were not represented by any really important political or social actors, right? And what changed was that the mainstream political narrative became also dominated by these anti-Western narratives because of those like proxy government groups which were trying to make Georgians being afraid of second front being opened in Georgia as well. However, if you just like go in Tbilisi streets for a quick walk, you will see that the sentiments towards Russians are quite negative, and even those who were maybe like okay to have them as tourists, as source of income, you know, like coming, spending some time and money in our small country, and we really needed such economic kind of boost. Even they started to rethink their approaches to this, and there are a lot of local businesses, small initiatives, which really are trying now to show to this crowd of people that they are not welcome there. And actually, there was also one very important part of the last year, which I think needs to be mentioned here, was that like during this last 3 decades, all opinion polls, all research, everything what was researched was saying that Georgians are supporting European integration and NATO integration of the country. They are pro-Western and like positively to this direction. But like then was a confronting question, like this sounds great on a paper, but what are Georgians actually up to do, like some real things to support these claims? And actually this year is a very good example that Georgians are really up to this, and they really mean it when they are saying that they support European integration of the country, and they demonstrated this during the last year with mass protests on several occasions. And the last very important part of this was the spring protest this year when Georgian government introduced the foreign agent law, which was actually affecting the whole civil society and the media environment in the country, and not just those, like everyone whoever could like receive any kind of donor support or international support within the country. And some skeptics, those who were like really not optimistic that Georgian society will stand up against this and government will still do it, you know, like it will be easy to do because like there is this nihilism, there is this polarization, political polarization between the society. It turned out not to be true, and actually this protest showed something new, that the mainstream political narrative which was brought by the government, like ruling party, this anti-Western political narrative did not work well, even though they had this huge government propaganda machine working actively with unlimited resources against the civil society and independent and critical voices in the society.
Thank you so much. We actually had a very similar narrative back a few years ago when we had pro-Russian channels owned by Ukrainian oligarch, which turned to be a Russian agent. So we had a narrative about Sarasyata, basically the same thing, like the attempt to discredit civil society. I have a very brief and tricky question, like super brief and slightly tricky. It starts almost like anecdote. What will happen if we put Russian people in a democratic environment? Like, do you think that it's possible somehow, because you told me before the panel, you told me that they behave much quieter in Georgia. They do not express their political views. Do you think that it's possible somehow putting them in these circumstances to bring them the knowledge to them that they were wrong and their country is wrong?
It's really a tricky question. I'm more how to say, I would prefer to have the individual approach, because like there are people even from Russia who really fled the country because they were not able to live in that country anymore. And of course we knew such people, and they are fighting together with us for the democracy we are having in our country still. But like you cannot tell this like about the group, because like that is also the safety issue as well, quite actively discussed among Georgian civil society. Having so many Russians in the country does not give the feeling of safety, like openly discuss or talk in the bars and cafes where like you don't know who is doing what and who is here for what. However, I think that the main factor in that is if you have as a country the government that you trust. If we would be in a situation that majority of Georgian population is trusting its government, then the picture would be really different. Right now we have a picture when the approximately 70% of Georgians are either pro-opposition or just not decided, but not pro-government. So this is really a very important kind of and tricky situation to be in. So, and we are approaching like kind of a very tense political process as well, because in 1 year we will have the 2024 parliamentary elections in our country, and that actually can be a game-changing event for Georgian democracy.
Thank you so much. Alina, my next question is for you. You represent Belarus, and I remember that during the revolution in Belarus, many Belarusians were saying that we are not doing Maidan, we don't want escalation, we don't want violence. And many things have changed since then. And many of those people ended up behind the bars. Many people left the country. What are the moods now? Do you think that this protest audience, protest part of the population understand that maybe escalation is a proper response to the government? And especially now when we hear many news from Russia and Belarus that now they have joined, nuclear weapons and basically are emerging in one country.
Thank you for this question. First, I should say that I left Belarus in the very end of 2020. That means that I haven't been there for 2.5 years, and I'm staying here in Ukraine since that time. And you said right that so many people flee the country. So many people have been detained, arrested, and now are just political prisoners. And the problem with them is getting worse and worse. And that is also a reason why people should do something. And I don't have like a strict answer for this question, but I think that those fact that Belarusian combatants, Battalion Kalinowskого and many other are fighting for the freedom of Ukraine and see this fighting is as the only way to liberate Belarus. And as far as I know from the people inside the Belarus, yes, there are some moods that are showing that people get more and more angry, raged, and we can only hope for some burst of activity and for some actions, but we cannot predict anything. But yes, I see more and more people who are standing for more, not weaponed, but for more radical actions. That's true. What else?
Thank you so much. And what is your estimation? Like, I understand personally that if you have an experience of loss, right? If you lose in some game, then it's much more difficult for you to start another protest, right? Yes. So what is your estimation on this?
I just hope that first I should say that of course people inside the Belarus, they are in very low mood. They have survived many negative moments. Many people, I mean that tens of thousands of people have been arrested, and there are more than 1,500 of political prisoners right now in Belarus, just officially recognized. And there is like a feeling of desperation, like inner emigration, something like this, and people cannot express their opinion just because of repressions, and everyone. I start my day with just to check who have been arrested for the previous day, what the trial was, who was sentenced to which for how long. So, but I'm sure that there are some movements inside Belarus, because I see more and more people coming here to stand for Ukraine, and that's true because they all come through Lviv, and we meet sometimes. And we have also problem with pro-Russian propaganda in Belarus. It's not our propaganda, but Belarusian propaganda has completely synchronized with the Russians one. And all our independent media working in exile, but they still save about 30% of audience, and now there is like a fight not for minds of audience, but the fight for minds of the people who are still staying in Belarus. But it's getting harder because regime of Lukashenko just does everything to block audience from getting the truthful information. There are so many ways of doing this. Sometimes our first medias claim to be extremists or terrorists, they are blocked, and the responsibility for getting the information is also put on the audience. That's, I mean that the audience, the people themselves, they are under the pressure and under the threat of arresting. If, for instance, their telephone will be checked, and it can be checked everywhere, on the street, in the airport, when someone comes to Belarus. What else? I just know that there is a feeling of terror there, and what you said, that we really have this flashback to 30s, to this Stalin's time right now. And when I say like this, it's not like metaphor. It is. I just can hope for something will change soon.
Thank you so much. Alexandra, now I'm moving to you. Your country, Moldova, is also desperately trying to break free from Russia's stranglehold, and we see a number of different initiatives related to limiting access of Russian propaganda to Moldovan society. To what extent these initiatives work, and how they are being perceived by Moldovan society?
Okay. Is it working? Yes. These initiatives work partially. So we banned the content produced in countries who doesn't sign the convention for trans-frontier television. Russia is the part of countries who doesn't sign this convention. So we don't have informational content produced in the Russian Federation, but we still have satellites, so people can watch Russian TV stations, as well as they can use internet to make it. Also we have Moldavian TV channels who work for Russian propaganda. Usually these TV channels are owned by pro-Russian politicians, so they make their own agenda, and people are susceptible to this type of content, to this type of propaganda. And if we're, okay, Moldova is kind of bilingual country, so we have a huge Russian-speaking population, but it's wrong to consider that only Russian-speaking population is susceptible to Russian propaganda. The polls shows that the Romanian-speaking population of Moldova is also susceptible to this type of propaganda. We had a ban on six TV channels, Moldovan TV channels, who was part of this Russian propagandistic content, but they still work. In the society, it was perceived like attack on freedom of expression. And our power did little to explain why they banned the TV channels. The reasons were not totally clear. These TV channels used the case to tell, okay, you see, there's no freedom of speech in Moldova. They shut our mouths because they don't want to see the truth, don't want to hear it, so you are manipulated.
I know that there are some European initiatives to build sort of a Stratcom system in Moldova. How does it work? Do you have, because we in Ukraine, we do not have one single body within our government responsible for strategic communications. Basically, all government institutions, they have their departments. Also, we have a few centers responsible for these issues. But all these bodies, they work basically on horizontal level. There is no clear understanding how and who is subordinated to whom. How does it look like in Moldova?
So we still don't have any strategic communication center, but as far as I know, since last year, there have been discussions about the possibility of establishing such kind of center for strategic communications. Initially, it was proposed to be under the government's jurisdiction, but now there is a suggestion to establish it in the president's office. However, these plans are still on the paper, so they are not publicly discussed at the moment.
Thank you so much. Let's proceed with questions from the audience. Do you have questions? Yes, please, Sergey. Not really.
Well,
Can
probably
we just
not.
feel
Now
you,
it
but
works.
not hear you.
Fine. I'm Sergey Sidorenko from European Pravda, covering our, let's say, close neighborhood. And first of all, of course, I'm interested in the situation in Moldova. How do you see a progress of change of this bilingual, by-standard society? Do you see that it is progressing in an unexpectedly high speed in their, let's say, changing of their perception of the reality? Do you see that Russian-speaking people are permanently changing their attitude, becoming more pro-European? So could you please share a dynamics, not the current state? And maybe if you see that the war has been a turning point, or I mean the big war, or it hasn't been, and earlier on something has happened. So would like to hear it.
Okay, it's about Moldova, right? If we're talking about Russian-speaking and Romanian-speaking population, I'll prefer to speak about age, yeah? If you are a young Russian-speaking person in Moldova, so I think you are a pro-European person and you support European integration. But if you are an older one, Russian-speaking person in Moldova, you are supporting Russia, good relationships with Russia, because Russia is our strategic partner, so it's not my saying, yeah, it's the narrative that is used. But at the moment, I think that all the things that are done in Moldova with the support of donors, with the European Union, with the United States of America, they work in a benefit for our society. So the support for European integration is in our country is very high. Like, I think 6 or 7 years ago, where there was a discussion about EU integration or Euro-Asiatic integration, the voices for both of them were like 45% and 40%. But now the situation changed totally, and we have, I can say, the full support for European integration among our population. So the initiative on promoting all these democratic values, they are working in our country. Okay, this group of elder population, it's marginalized at the moment, yeah, because, oh, you're crazy, you support war in Ukraine, we cannot talk to you. But if we're talking about other group of people, yeah, the war helped to make this waterline, yeah. I'm with Europe, I don't want to find myself in a situation that Ukrainians found themselves. I want to be a part of a civilized world, so I know which choice I should make.
Thank you. Other questions? Oh, yes, we have at least two. First one, here.
Чутно?
Так.
Вибачте, будь ласка, я українською задам питання. Олесь Мінов, Білоруська асоціація журналістів. Я хочу запитати, трішки уточнити про цей наратив, про те, що люди сталого віку підтримують Росію, Радянський Союз, а молодь начебто має прогресивну позицію. Просто, наскільки мені відомо, цей наратив є з самого початку 90-х років, так кажуть, скрізь. І ось у всіх наших країнах пострадянських По сьогоднішній день є певна частина суспільства, яка підтримує Росію і ностальгує за Радянським Союзом, в тому числі і молодь, на жаль. В мене питання, яка ситуація саме з молоддю, що ностальгує за Радянським Союзом у ваших країнах, і, на вашу думку, звідки такі люди беруться? Чому молоді люди підтримують саме такі наративи?
Це питання до всіх учасниць.
Ну, напевно, так. Дякую.
So I'll translate it to you. So there is a presumption that older people usually support all these damageable Russian ideas, and younger people, they kind of have access to other information, and they have different views. But in fact, the situation is quite different, right? There are many people among youth who actually support the war and who promote Russian narratives. Why is it so? Yeah.
Okay. In Moldova, we have Gagauz autonomy. And it's the case where a lot of young people support Russia. Maybe not Russian aggression, but they support Russia. It's a Russian-speaking region, and they receive all the content in Russian language. And I call this type of mindset a nostalgic trap. Yeah, when the water was more wet, when the grass were more green, so we miss these times, the times of our childhood. I think they receive it from their parents. Because when your mom says that my life was so beautiful in the Soviet Union, but now everything is so bad, and you have this kind of frustration when you cannot find yourself and you cannot find your place in your country. You think that in the past you would find one. So these people live in delirium. I don't know how to call it. And they even don't know how it was in Soviet Union, but they're in this nostalgic trap. Maybe it comes from the family.
Nino.
I would like to add to that like I agree, like some vulnerabilities that might be in place that make people to stick to the ideas that are really like perceived from us like weird. But in Georgia, actually, we cannot find that group, like in terms of research and public opinion surveys. Young people who support Russia and war, there is no such, you know, like you cannot have evidence of that there is this young group, like the large number of young people who support the war or are pro-Russian. There might be some, of course, I agree, but you cannot measure this. They are so small. Mostly, actually, these anti-Russian protests, just like I was talking about the spring protests, was driven by Gen Z. And that was actually the new thing about the Georgian protests. They came and they never went off, like they never went home. And the government saw that these are people who you cannot like bring into the political polarization. They are not opposition or government supporters. They are just young people who care for their future and for the possibilities they see in like the Western world and in Europe. And they do have already for a few years already free visa regime with Europe, so they have traveled a lot, they have seen some things, so it's really not easy for Russian propaganda to penetrate in this group in Georgia's case. And also there is a helpful thing that Russian language knowledge among people in Georgia who are younger than 35, it's really very low. Like you can find like some few people there, but it's really low. Sorry? So government is a different thing. Even those who are pro-government, like if you look at the public opinion surveys, just recent ones, there are several public opinion surveys done regularly in Georgia. Those, the group which is supporting the Georgian government, even among the supporters of Georgian ruling party, a very small fraction, 1/3, is also supporting good relations with Russia. So this is something that actually Georgian government is trying to play with. They never declared that they are pro-Russian or they want to be close to Russia. They, on the official narrative, they do have that Georgia is going to Europe and we want to do that. But then comes the repetition of the Kremlin propaganda networks in their narratives. For example, that West is trying to bring us on the second front line. They want us to be fragile as Ukraine. So that is tricky thing. So I think that it's really among young people in Georgia, the support to war in Ukraine and to Russia is really low. So you cannot measure that group in numbers.
Thank you, Alina.
Yes, I can add about Belarus if you don't know. In Belarus, I think that such factor as social elevator works, because young people from regions, from villages, from Russian-speaking environment, they don't have another opportunity, and they get into this flourishing environment of pro-Lukashenko support. I mean, Belarusian Republican Union of Youth. It's like our Komsomol organization. It still works, and it not only works, but it's really flourishing in Belarus. And only ideology works, starting from the level of kindergarten and up, school, university, and so on. And those young people, they haven't been often they haven't been to countries abroad. They only know this Russia and Belarus, and they didn't see anything else. That's why. And I had one point more. Okay, I will tell you later, maybe.
Thank you so much. Do we have one more question, please? I'm sorry, we don't have enough time. So one more question.
Yeah, hi, my name is Viktor Pichuhin. I'm from Nakipilo, Kharkiv, and I have two questions, sorry.
And direct them to two people. That's it, not to all of the panelists.
Another part of Russian expansion in Ukraine is the myth of the great patriotic war, like Великая Отечественная, with which they replace the Second World War. Does such a problem exist in your countries, and how do you deal with it? And the second is the government of Georgia is trying, from what I see, is trying to balance between Europe and the Russian Federation. We are familiar with this position because our president, former President Yanukovych, he tried to do such thing in 2013, and it ended with a revolution. How it will end in Georgia?
So, and the first question is for?
I don't know who.
Choose.
Who? I think it maybe for Botakoz.
For you. Yeah.
Well, thank you for the question. World War II is I didn't research kind of the attitudes right now, but I see two kind of strands of thinking about World War II. The first one is this very post-colonial, where it's still in kind of very Soviet discourse, or we were also part of World War II, and for example, the person who put the flag on the Bundestag was a Kazakh, and it's kind of, but only
So it was
Russian
Ukrainian.
soldiers.
It was Ukrainian.
It was Ukrainian,
I'm sorry.
all right. But I think So and it's a very kind of this colonial discourse, but we were also there rather than, but there are also kind of discussion that we should move from that and say that we need to recognize that World War II was also had a lot of colonial and criminal, and that we need to realize that we were also part of atrocities, etc. So there is a movement also against these symbols of World War II. So I think there is a discussion. So what actually now what is taking place is decolonization. A lot of debates, a lot of arguments and struggles among people. They're constant, they're daily, and so this is kind of the intense process of discussing everything. Every single symbol, people are writing down stories of their grandparents, and also World War II plays a big role. Kazakhstan doesn't celebrate the May Parade for the second year. So one of the biggest kind of journalists said that we will wait for the Ukrainian victory, and this is the only victory day that we will be celebrating. It became very viral. Everyone was very happy about it. Yes, so we now are in the process of hot debates and struggles, but yes, I cannot give any numerical data on that. Yeah.
Thank you. And who's taking the second question?
Second was, I think, about Georgia and how like Georgian civil society would proceed if the game is played that way. Like, I think it took many years, but it comes already the understanding that we are fighting the oligarchic kleptocratic regime, and that is the regime which is standing in front of our European aspirations, actually. And I'm very, very hopeful that still there is a room for peaceful, like democratic process to change this situation in Georgia, because civil society really showed some good success stories recently. However, I understand that even so there were these small wins, we have very difficult time ahead. And it does not mean that this will be easy. I think the very last wave of protests also showed that Georgians will kind of try to defend its Western mindset and the route which was actually chosen not by this generation, but like for hundreds of years already by Georgian people, for whatever it takes. And we have few examples of such fight in our recent history.
Thank you so much. We have to finish this panel. I'm very grateful to you all, and summarizing everything that you all have said, looks like that painful experience we all have is caused by one country, one totalitarian country. And now we are living through a very unique moment. When we are that much close to the collapse of this country. That's why we have to defeat Russia and put as much effort as possible into it. Thank you so much. I'm going to moderate the next panel as well. We need 5 minutes to change the setting. The format of the next discussion is going to be slightly different. I will introduce the participants, and they will have very brief solo presentations, and then we will have a discussion. So bear with me for another hour. Thank you.